Welcome to Nowhere. I'm your host, Keegan Otwell. I'm out in the country at night, just down the road from the house that I grew up in. And it's raining. That sound that you can hear in the distance, that is the highway. It sounds strange at night. It warps, almost whispers sometimes. And everything out here is totally black. I can see in every direction. I remember nights out here. This blackness so dark that it crawls in through the window at night. I'm gonna start off with a poem that is by Hafez, 14th century Persian poet. This is where the title comes from for this episode. Here's that poem. The small man builds cages for everyone he knows, while the sage, who has to duck his head when the moon is low, drops keys all night long for the beautiful, rowdy prisoners. I identify with the beautiful, rowdy prisoner part. It immediately reminded me of the friends that I had, people I considered family, but also dying in pursuit of that freedom in some cases. For a long time I thought drugs were what I needed to feel free. So this episode is about the time leading up to when I did leave home that final time and hit the road for 3 years, being homeless all over the country. I always loved nights in a way because it felt like the one time where nothing was required of me and I could pretend that the sun was never going to come up and I could exist in my own world while the whole world was asleep. You know, I have these writings that I just discovered that are pertinent to this period of time in my life. So here's one of those things that I wrote quite a while ago, before I ever left home, while I was still in this house out here. Here it is. A clear memory. 4th grade Keegan is outside at recess on a fall day, and he speaks to his friend Nathan, saying, "Every day is the exact same thing. I get up, I go to school, I come home, watch TV, and go to bed. Those are my words as I remember them. But what I remember even more is the feeling that I had. It was the first feeling of meaningless, like my existence was fading with each day repeated. Maybe I've always been discontent. Maybe my soul was shaped that way from the beginning." And that's something I wrote years ago that I found kind of interesting. You know, I'm out here because this is literally where it all started, you know? It's where I grew up, and I had a good childhood, you know? I mean, I got good at creating my own worlds that I would live inside. It's kind of that time in the 90s and early 2000s, and we really didn't have internet for a while until I was a bit older, and we never had cable out here. My parents divorced when I was 7, but it made sense to me at the time. It wasn't something that was particularly awful or anything. You know, I knew it wasn't my fault, and it honestly didn't really bother me that much. You know, things were pretty okay until my senior year of high school. You know, I had already had issues and dealt with addiction by then and been to rehab once. But when things really started getting dark for me, it was when I had met someone and we created this idea of a relationship between us. I'll call her A. And, you know, this idea was kind of fueled by your classic teenage nihilism, along with cinema that we both loved and music. Looking back, it was all rather silly, but at the time it totally consumed me. There was a lot of self-harm towards the end, and I was doing cold pills and air duster just because it was all I could get my hands on, and whatever synthetic weed they had out at the time. She had a boyfriend, so there was always that point of conflict, that inability to be as close as I actually wanted. And it came to a head at one point. It was my senior year. I'd just gotten back from my winter vacation that we'd spent a lot of that. I think it was like 24 hours of it, like Skyping each other. I just like one day at school, I was just like, fuck this. Like, why do you even need me? I had gotten to a point where I would be texting her and was so addicted to the contact that I would just wait, filled with adrenaline, for each text. We spoke around this time in some dumb poetic shorthand, and I was always prying open the subtext, hoping I could find hints and traces of her true love for me. And eventually I just couldn't take the feeling anymore, and we got in an argument where I was essentially threatening to cut her off because she still had her boyfriend and everything was incredibly painful for me. That's when she finally admitted that she loved me. It kind of slipped out, and I was ecstatic. I thought it changed everything, but she didn't want it to change anything. She said it so that I wouldn't leave. I'll say I was not innocent in this exchange over these months of, but there was some manipulative shit going on with keeping me around. And it's insane going back through all my writing that I just got access to again. There's so much about this period of time, and even now it brings back uncomfortable feelings and memories of how awful I felt around that time, and a lot of that was out here, especially like this time of winter. It was a dark time. I really wanted to die. That period of time is why I will never look down on or invalidate a younger person's feelings about anything. The depths of what I felt was incredibly real and incredibly painful. It's true I didn't understand what love was, what the real love in a functional relationship looked like. The only source where I saw what I thought were functional, or at least romantic relationships, were movies, and eventually I even glorified the dysfunctional and fucked up relationships also. Some really dark times. The dextromethorphan in cold pills is a powerful dissociative in high doses that lasts for hours, and when I was really abusing it, I was just kind of in another world for extended periods of time. There was a period of time where I was almost always on it, and there's like messages that I saved for some reason from that time in this like different documents, and some of them were just total gibberish. It's frightening. It's like stuff that I thought was making sense. I think I saved them to keep some kind of token of how bad that addiction got. And there was a period of time where my dad thought I was actually like schizophrenic at one point. I would have done any drugs at that point, really. Here's another piece of writing from that time about this relationship. We built the fantasy together, and it grew like a cell culture, rapidly expanding and multiplying, enveloping new ideas and feelings that had never been tapped before. A self-perpetuated fantasy, spiraling into despair, because that love never really could be validated, never consoled or even closed. There's never been an ending to that idea. Ideas are dangerous. There's a lot of writing around that time like that. I could honestly just get lost in it. There's a lot more stuff I could quote here that I won't, because, I have put this period of time behind me, obviously. But, this episode is about looking back. So, this is what led me going to rehab for the second time when I was 17, was this relationship and this desperation and addiction. It led to me being clean for 3 years. I had truly, finally, become desperate enough to try to change. I learned when I was in treatment that I had become addicted to my own misery, that my engagement in the invisible world of this relationship, where we use deep words like everything to describe the mountain of bullshit between us we created after months of constant contact and emails and poems and text messages and secret Tumblr posts. Alright, I'm gonna do a little transition here, just so I can kind of talk at a better volume. I had thought patterns where I would focus and dwell on like the most painful things I could think of and just find some sort of like comfort or familiarity in my misery and just like fucking dwell in it. It led to a 3-month treatment that I had to like drop out of my senior year of high school for, which luckily I was still able to complete. It made me get clean and become active in Narcotics Anonymous. It led to like 3 years of that. And I got a sponsor, and I became very close friends with like a small, tight-knit group of people that I spent most of my free time with. And they were all older than me, you know? Yeah, just like healthy friends, really good people. Life was looking better. I was happy I left her behind. I realized in treatment, like, that was the problem. That relationship was the problem. And yeah, I went to college for a while. I dated in college. One was, I'll call her L, I guess. And we dated for like a year. And to date, that was probably the healthiest relationship I've ever had. I also like started a business with my friend, you know, and I was getting into e-cigarettes, which was like new around this period of time. Yeah, we started a business when I was 19, and I was manufacturing e-liquid for vapes and selling them wholesale to retailers. You know, at some point I started talking to A again. And I'd broken up with L one point, and slowly but surely we like fell back into a familiar routine. This time though, we kind of joked more about how serious we had been back in high school. And once again, she had a boyfriend. You know, things were fucked up for a while again because of that. She broke up with him one night and then came straight to my place afterwards. And then, so like after 3 or 4 years, we finally, you know, kissed for the first time. And that kicked off a relationship. And she kind of proposed to me one night, Christmas time. And we were seeing friends of hers that she still had in high school who were like performing madrigals. We went to watch them, and afterwards she started introducing me to everyone as her fiance, which I like had assumed we were headed in that direction because there was a lot of talk of like, oh, we're soulmates. And then like one night she once again came into town from school and she broke up with me. I was devastated, and at the time I was absolutely clueless as to like why, and I didn't get any answers from her. I can't remember what she even said that night. I was fucking like a just mess, sobbing, begging, and like I don't know, but she wasn't happy, and I was pretty stagnant at the time. You know, like looking back I can see different reasons why she wanted to like move on. You know, I had 3 years to clean up to that point. Part of it was that it was just like she was like the only thing in my life. So yeah, not healthy, and I wasn't going to meetings, and yeah, I relapsed hard. I was already working on selling my business at that time, and I had sold it for $3,000. I decided to start fucking around with the dark web, and I had never done any hard drugs, you know, at that point, besides that fucking cold pill and air duster bullshit. So I tried everything. I ordered meth, cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, DMT, opium, mushrooms. I'm sure there's one or two other, like 2CB, like different weird psychedelic analogs. Yeah, I just like decided to try everything. There was a decent amount of psychedelics involved, and I think the psychedelics might have been what was saving me around that period of time, which I would not usually say. Like, I don't usually say that about psychedelics, where it's like, oh, they like totally changed my life. It was around that time would be the first time I would actually leave home to go live somewhere else. I went to live on a farm out in New Mexico that someone I knew was living on. I went out there, and after being there for a month, I moved from his farm out to the high desert west of Taos on someone's property that was kind of isolated in the desert. And this was my first taste of the desert, and I loved it. You know, the stars at night were fucking beautiful. The sunsets, you know, there were like mountains in the distance, so it wasn't all flat either. And there's just wide open space with nothing around. And I always just feel like my soul can just breathe out in the desert. He sold mushrooms, yeah, and he had this one batch that like the color was just off, but they were fine, so he didn't want to sell it just because of like marketing or or whatever, but I could eat as many of those as I wanted. Yeah, and like some nights it felt like I was just like living in a Van Gogh painting, you know, just like being there outside all the time and walking around barefoot in the desert dirt. I felt connected. I like stayed on this like old 64 Dodge school bus on his property, and I was helping him grow in weed. And yeah, it was like the summer ended. I got to October and it was after the harvest, and winter was coming. That was not going to be a warm place in the winter. It's at like 8,000 feet elevation, I think. So I had to go back home, and I had no apartment to move back into. So I had to go back home to my dad's house. You know, I didn't have a vehicle. My vehicle I'd left in New Mexico because it broke down, and it was just me and my dad, and kind of a distance between us, just filled by each empty day I spent doing nothing. You know, I was always a night owl, but some nights a certain kind of like loneliness and hopelessness that had soaked into the walls of that old farmhouse enveloped me, so left floating, lost, haunting the house I grew up in. That period of time is kind of hard for me to understand or remember chronologically. From there, I started to hang out with my friend Kay, who I met and briefly dated in college. But now I was no longer in NA, and we spent much of that summer drinking and smoking weed, and at her expense. She had the vehicle, and so she was the one who would drive 45 minutes out here to these cornfields and, you know, free me from my prison. She was a shining light that made my life a lot better around that time. And I feel bad because she wanted more from me, and I couldn't or didn't give it to her. She talked a lot about her mental illness and what she was going through around that time, and I really wasn't able to help her. You know, I tried to help her. I listened to her, but I probably wasn't that good of a listener, you know, and I really feel like, I don't know, I feel bad about this period of time because I feel like I was kind of using her as an escape. Even though, like, I loved her, I do love her, but I didn't have much capacity back then for anything but, you know, trying to escape and get outside of myself. It wasn't the best period of time for her. You know, we were close that summer. We hung out like every day, spent so much time talking, and we got matching tattoos that referred to the play Waiting for Godot, where two main characters talk in circles, waiting for someone who never shows up, for a purpose that never arrives, never escaping that one spot and the single dead tree. It reminded us of us. And after doing acid with her for her first time and having a wonderful night, she woke up the next day and told me she was going to kill herself. And I didn't know what to do or say, so I took her to the psych ward. And that ended that period of our relationship, and while in there, she wrote a letter to me that was more like a poem about that summer and the drugs and booze and our relationship that didn't go anywhere, just like that play by Samuel Beckett. You know, nothing really changed. Certainly nothing was fixed or helped. And yeah, I felt like a piece of shit who used her reading that. And I remember like ugly crying reading that letter that she had dropped off at this house out in the country. And that is all to say, you know, I've had many periods of my life that were aimless, listless, that I simply survived, that I just continued to live through, you know, with no direction or purpose. Not to mention the fact that, like, obviously I am a privileged person. This whole story is kind of undercut by that fact that I was even able to have a period of time at this age where I wasn't working, wasn't really doing anything, just living at home, existing. You know, I say all this because my path to what became homelessness is different than many others, you know. It was driven by choice, initially at least. And, you know, my life wasn't fraught with obstacles and horrible pressures that forced me to live on the road. If anything, there was more ennui, you know, anhedonia, depression, or whatever you want to call it. I do think that some of us can get caught in a trap sometimes where we know there are always others who have it worse than us. And therefore, you know, complaining about our situation is not only pointless, it is like an affront to the lived experiences of others, which I still struggle with this myself. And I've struggled with that a lot just creating this episode and trying to put this stuff about me out there. I'm self-conscious about that. But this is also about, getting to the bottom of that feeling and what drives that depression and why so many of us aren't content. Why even I, at the age of 8 or 9, was tired of the monotony of life, and I think we have to tell ourselves, like, it is okay to complain. After all, if we just accept everything, we're actually doing those who have it worse a disservice. We're saying that the world we are living in is okay, that we should just deal with it, that others have it worse, that quote-unquote life isn't fair. And once we recognize that there is something systemic at play here, we can begin to move closer to finding some solutions. So within the next few months of that period of time, I would move back to Springfield after my dad bought a 95 VW Golf off of a friend of his for $1,000 and gave it to me. I was able to use this to get a job delivering for a local sandwich shop. And after a few months of that, I had an apartment again in Springfield. I was more on my own. The interesting thing about my story is that despite my general stability and independence, now having a vehicle in my own place, I still decided after a year living there that I was going to leave, to hit the road. And I'm not like a particularly self-reliant person or someone who is like extremely capable in all situations. I'm just someone who became tired enough and desperate enough. But let's take a quick look at that year leading up to my leaving. I was very involved with a local poetry scene that at that point was thriving. I was going to open mics. I became best friends with my friend Ian, who's a local historian, an author, and a poet. And I was learning to love Springfield, and he helped provide me with detailed history. We walked around a lot, many nights spent walking around just talking. Yeah, I think to transition into this period of time in my life, I'm gonna play my brother's song from his album American Dreams, because that was like one of the only kind of things of music I was listening to around the time I left almost every night. So here's that. So yeah, that song is called Head Pokers from my brother's album, American Dreams. And he goes by Luke Henry as the musician of that album. So, what better to explain my mindset during this period of time in Springfield in my apartment than my writings from this time? Like I mentioned earlier, I just got access to this old Gmail account and just rediscovered all of these writings that have really just like this window back in time to different periods of time in my life, including this one, which is why I just kind of really great timing for this episode. Something I really thought I wasn't going to have access to ever again. But yeah, the following are excerpts from a journal, and I do want to stress I wrote this as like a satirical journal. I was kind of inspired by like John Fonte. The idea was to like write a journal of a self-obsessed writer who thought he was a genius. I know, right? Totally satirical, though, for real. Not, I did not actually think that of myself. But it is based in reality, though, so, I'll go ahead and read some excerpts from that. Alright. I work delivering sandwiches to homes and apartment complexes. I go up the elevator, and come back down. See me in the elevator, pointing with one index finger up to the heavens as I rise past the cement holes of so many people. In the hallways are different smells. Weed, stew, cigarette smoke, cat litter, dying people, all mingling into some kind of idea of the place at that moment in time. We are such private creatures. Let me make stories for all of you. Just give me a glimpse of your life. My life is going to be mine, I swear. I am taking back my mind starting now, but the whole day won't be mine for a long time. I need to get the right books to get my mind reeling at the proper RPM around the clock. The right books, the right ideas. I'm already made of the right stuff. Moving in the right direction. I guess I'll try to find those Russian pre-revolution novelists that Bukowski mentioned. Looking for something real, trying to find something real, passion maybe. Or the right combination of ideas and feelings. I don't even like Bukowski that much. Maybe I don't like any poets that much. Maybe I just don't get it. Maybe no one is doing it right and I'll be the first. Poetry is great, but much of the effort is that of waiting through all of it with my simple, uneducated mind. Me and my simple mind and my simple feelings and ideas like wood and nails, and I'll build a fucking cathedral with these simple elements. I'll burn it down for the insurance money. Fuck you. I don't know what I'm talking about. Except for fuck your canons and literary illusions and structure and commas. I'll burn it all down and do it right and write something real. Something that will walk off the page and start wars raging in the mind, forest fires, etc. And that's the end of that excerpt. And so there you really get that kind of sense of like self-obsession I was going for, of grandiosity. I was doing all of this as a kind of like writing exercise to be able to take what otherwise was incredibly boring life, looking at it from the outside. If it was like a movie, you would just see someone who went to work like everyone else and went home and drank and read and smoked cigarettes. And so trying to take that monotony and that character that was also myself and turn him inside out, kind of trying to create like an internal dialogue that could find great moments among the banal, everyday moments of life. Which is also like very telling, I think, of what was going through my mind around that time period. I think even then this was kind of like a survival tactic. In some ways, it made me look for more on a day-to-day basis and made me try to think of like what I could do, what I could get out of each moment. And I do think it's actually like a great exercise if you want to work on writing like internal dialogue for characters on like a first-person basis. Just like a world where their reality is totally tinged by their own feelings and ideas and beliefs. Trying to take everyday moments and pump them up into something more, almost kind of magical realism, or, more accurately, probably just like self-delusion kind of aspect. Alright, here's another one. After another night of closing, come home and drink. Try to relax and slow the gears of anxiety enough to let me sleep. Sit at the screen and type out words. We are all being wasted, us sandwich makers. At least I am. I'm here to make history, not sandwiches. Brian is my coworker. He grew up in the Appalachian Mountains where he carried his own gun by age 7. Later in life, he also camped in the woods outside Cincinnati and lived there until the cops found him. They almost got him for his antlers. This is why Brian is a good guy. He knows things. We talk about dystopian novels and how to trap game. We both long for an entirely different life. I hope we find it. My search begins here soon, my great journey, the pilgrimage to reality, a crisp reality, unmarred by the wastes of late capitalism. Right now, we are the waste. What are we doing here in this sandwich shop in central Illinois? Who knew knees like ours could bend so easily? And that is, where you kind of get that little bit of that flavor of self-obsession of, Alright, here's another one. I am a seeker. I am looking for the answers. Several times I thought I found them. All I had found were ways of losing myself. It becomes too easy. You find yourself in a river and you glide along peacefully, unobstructed. This is the way for so many, moving like a dream. Row, row, row your boat. Tow the line. Carry your weight. Do your duty. Be a productive member of society by all means. Live in this constricted fashion and whittle away your purpose into an accidental caricature of your intent. It is too easy, especially when life has been easy. I have battled with myself, but the battlegrounds were safe. And here's one more paragraph. Civilizations rise and fall while the sun waits to die. Writers choke on their words. We all work, the bulk of us. A job is something you have to do. Duty is an idea that works. This place is falling apart. We smile and choke under our skin. We make our bed of ideas and lie in it, wrapping ourselves tight in the knowledge that we are secure. We are on the path to more. We are here to rise above the natural world and conquer it. We are the best goddamn things that this earth has ever seen. We are Americans. We have so much in common that we have become experts in finding the differences. I really like that last sentence. So much in common that we become experts in finding the differences. I was living that life of working. It's a simple thing of wanting to get out of the area where I grew up, knowing that obviously there's a whole world out there to explore, and knowing that I wasn't getting anything done, paying to stay stuck in one place. I was willing to make a sacrifice because I had almost nothing to sacrifice except for, the seeming security, safety, and stability, somewhere to shit and sleep. And then some more writing from this time. Here's an excerpt from an actual travel journal that just has some stuff I wrote before I left. It's kind of me planning to leave. And here's a excerpt from that. I am driven by a force within me that refuses to accept the normal path of society. These are not matters of idealism or even ideology, but survival. I require things that are real. Being tied to a routine that revolves around trying to make money is not how I wish to live, at least not in the terms I've been living them. It is not that I don't want to work, but I want my work to have worth to it. Everyone feels this way. Laying it out more clearly. Up to this point, I feel like I have been approaching my path from entirely the wrong angles. My life is not meant to be a series of checkpoints to being an established member of society. Alright, and then, obviously I mentioned that kind of poetry community, and I discovered a lot of poetry that I wrote around that time, so I'm just going to read just like a couple things from that. This is kind of like from a chapbook that I never published, but the kind of intro to it is this. This is what I give back to you, Springfield, Midwest, fields of corn that crossed my skin and eyes and mind and taught me to be alone. I used to hate you. I used to hate myself. I'm learning to love and understand. This is for the town I cursed, the city I screamed against, always leaving. I'm here now, and I've constructed these tools of survival for myself. A desperate search for meaning in a meaningless world, in alleyways, on empty streets, black-filled nights that live inside. Beauty is filth and broken things. Beauty is how it heals. Here's one that I kind of wrote about poetry. This is back when, I was really trying to find poetry I liked, and I was reading a lot of poetry that I didn't like. And most of that came from, academics or people who went to school to learn how to write poetry. So this poem's called Publish or Perish. Think the same thought 100 times. String it up like the Romans did Jesus. Find some folds of old text to allude to. Mention myths and be above them. For you are writing poetry, O student, O learned one. Wrap your poems in razor wire so the thought never escapes and no one can ever reach it. Your poems are more depressing than the zoo, or maybe I'm just too stupid to get it. Ugh, I kind of like that one. This one is called Reasons to Drink Less. The nights are all dark and mushy, like something forgotten at the bottom of a drain. Turning my name inside out, this kind of coming alive has death written all over it. It tattoos the next day, marking it as dying, wandering further and further from myself, each night, every day not quite making it all the way back. And that's that poem. Maybe you can kind of get the gist of what I was feeling around this time. There's many ways of saying the same thing. I wanted something else, anything else. I'd become willing to try something different. And I can't remember how many months in advance I had decided that I was leaving. It was based around when the year lease on my apartment would be up. The year spent in that apartment wasn't a terrible one, but it wasn't the best either. Back then, I was maybe rather naive about what I thought I would find out in the world. I was ignorant as to who your company is when you're surrounded by people who left society behind. Beyond geological and scenic discoveries, I wanted to discover a new way to live, and I had these vague fantasies that I would meet the right person at the right time, that I might find a way of making a living that I found more agreeable, maybe some farm where I could go to the farmer's market with what we harvested, but life is what you make of it, and, I really let my addiction get the best of me for a lot of that period of time. Yeah, so I was looking for what all of us are looking for. Somewhere I felt like I belonged. Somewhere that didn't feel miserable, which I did feel that way when I got around the right people in the slabs. I felt like I belonged. I've always found different avenues of escape ever since I was a kid. At first it was imaginary worlds, then worlds inside books, and then eventually it was drugs. And at one point I thought I had found the answer when I found drugs. I thought that if I could just find the right combination, I would be okay. I could be myself. I could exist without this constant pain that I didn't know how to get rid of. I could leave behind the constant fear, and I tried and tried, but this time felt like an adventure, and it became an adventure, but not in the way I thought it was going to be. The reality of the situation was that all of the learning about permaculture I wanted to do and farming was something I didn't ever end up doing. I had heard of Slab City somewhere at some point. There's plenty of clickbait videos about the place, and I lived here a month, and it's so dangerous. Some people call it the last free place on earth, which is also the name of a documentary. It might be the most popular documentary about the place, but the last free place on earth. Not very free if you ask me. And for those who don't know, the slabs are this off-the-grid community that started in the late 50s and has been built and added on top of a demolished military base that left nothing but concrete slabs behind, hence the name. And it's an interesting place. It's in the middle of nowhere in Southern California, and it has artist communities. East Jesus, Slab City is not really meant to be owned, but there's a library. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. But the idea was being there in the winter for Christmas and New Year's, since I knew I wasn't going to be with my family. I'd be somewhere I assumed no one else would be with their family either. Something I remember from writing from Slab City when I was living there, and I had been there for a while, was I'm free, whatever that means. I thought I could change the world, but it just keeps changing me. That is really what it comes down to. Life is what you make of it, and after 2 months in the slabs, I'd found myself in an abusive relationship with a woman who was over a decade older than me, and I had spent all my money on booze for us, and, she was a good person at heart. She had borderline personality disorder, which is rough, if you've ever been in a relationship with someone who has it, especially if it is not dealt with, and you add addiction and alcohol on top of it, it fucking can be super rough. You will find yourself at some points living in a reality constructed by your partner. Yeah, you will think you are the terrible person they tell you you are, and you will find yourself in fights that you don't know how you got there or what you guys are even fighting about. It can be scary. But yeah, she's a good person at heart. She's not here anymore like so many others from this period of time when I was traveling. And, that's what it had become for me. It was a kind of death. I was free, but I had no idea what to do with that freedom. And after a bad acid trip, I escaped the slabs. I had met someone who convinced me to get the fuck out of there and really hit the road, and that was kind of the start of the real adventure of a time existing with no money, learning where I had to ask strangers for gas money and play an instrument I had just started learning for cash, and begging kind of became, honestly, one of the most honest ways I've ever lived. And it's really hard, but it's something you have to get past of if you want to exist out there. And there are ways to, not do it, especially if all you need is food, for instance. You can live very, very cheap, but if you have any addictions, or stuff outside of food, or, gas and other stuff, you're gonna have to ask for money at some point. But the honesty comes in just being like, hey, I'm broke, I'm traveling, this is what I'm doing, if you want to help me, you can. And it's honest. You kind of, live this life where you wake up every day with no money, and somehow you'll get what you need. The world actually does have some kind people in it, and given it's a small percentage, but, you only need one person at a time to help you, and that's all it took to keep on going, and keep on going I did. To transition to the final section of this episode, I'm going to play a song that is an original song that I actually wrote myself. And what's funny about this song is that I wrote it and I had the melody and everything in my head. And I wrote it when I was still in that apartment back in Springfield. And one morning, I just woke up with this song in my head, and I sat down, and it all poured out of me within 30 minutes, and I never changed a word. And the funny part is, I figured out more than a year later, after I'd already been on the road for a while, and I'd learned to play guitar, and my favorite chord progression actually went perfectly to the lyrics and melody. I had learned how to play the song that I had written back when I didn't know how to play an instrument. It was just kind of a neat feeling of things lining up weirdly with that. And, sometimes it feels like some ideas really do come from somewhere else, and we're just biodegradable antennas catching a signal for a brief moment in time. But anyway, here it is. Yeah, a bit rough, not quite on tempo, from a video from another traveler who was live streaming his music at this point, kind of cyber-busking. And yeah, I sit down and I play this song. So here it is.
I'm gonna turn you over to my friend Keegan that I just met. For a song or two. Keagle's gonna play a song, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. This is an original. I don't have a name for it.
Try. Oh yes, this is a river where you swim until you die.
car when you ain't got a dream. Drowning out that light inside in this river deep. So keep yourself just working with them bloody hands. You find yourself some meaning you can't understand. And when people ask how you are, you tell them you're fine. Don't let them ever know that you're drowning deep inside. I think it's a universal feeling, you know, I've said it before, but just wanting something more, and obviously most of us don't love our jobs, and we sacrifice most of our lives to make profit for people we never meet. And some of us dream of running away and leaving it all behind. As kids, we get asked the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And even then, we don't realize that what that means is what kind of worker do you want to be when you grow up? Not what kind of person, not how do you want to help people, what do you want to become? What do you want your existence to be? And it's weird how we word that and make that who we are. Because it's okay to not be okay with the world we live in. You know, I've seen it before, but we have it better than someone else. There's always going to be someone else out there who has it worse. You know, people always say that, and that will always be true. But we get taught the lesson that life isn't fair and that we shouldn't complain, that we have to keep our heads down and keep on. All of this hard work done by the working class is meaning and worth. It's worth less and less as the years go by. The wealth gap is widening every year. Rich people are getting richer, and like newer generations are understanding this. Less and less people are trusting the system, and it's this feeling. And I ask myself all the time, like, how am I supposed to dedicate my life to the hope that 40 or 50 years from now, like, there will still even be an economy left, you know, when I'm looking at, like, trying to find a career with retirement options, if I can even do that. And I read and see more and more every day about, like, the greedy fucks who are driving the system, who base everything on the profits for next quarter, who are behind the wheel of the U.S. economy and been fucking redlining the throttle for years now, depending on unlimited growth of GDP, which is physically impossible, and I know it is inevitable that it will all collapse again. And the only question is, when is it going to collapse and not get back up? I get it. It's hard. I know it's hard to fight back against this kind of system, and I don't even know exactly how to do that. And it's hard to think on or dwell about this shit when just scraping by is fucking exhausting. But, you know, when our data is being mined and every second we spend online is monetized, like, eventually capitalism has made it into every inch and second of our lives. And the system will continue to monetize everything it can get its hands on. Human suffering, fear, hate, bigotry, natural disasters, climate change, human connection, love. It infects everything it touches and fucking turns it inside out into this commodity, this zombie of what it was. And eventually it's okay to say no, to not accept the world we're living in. I do have hope. I think that we are all kind of waking up to the bullshit. The system is serving us less and less, you know, facilitating our survival less and less, and the people at the top are being served more and more, you know, they're extracting more and more value because they don't fucking care about us, and they will continue to extract as much value as they possibly fucking can quarter after quarter because they don't care about 1 year, 2 years, a fucking decade, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years into the future. They care about what the fuck their profits look like next quarter. And these are the people who more and more are in charge of the fucking world. Anyway, I do have hope, you know. Yeah, our real value as humans exists outside of that system. It exists in how we treat each other, how we form bonds and community and extend love and compassion to those who need it. You know, it's in how we fight for change in the face of colossal and seemingly unbeatable odds. We, the beautiful rowdy prisoners fighting to keep our humanity, sanity, and love in a time when the world is burning down around us. And, this is the crux of this story, of my story, is this episode is, why do people do this? Why do some like me take a chance effectively becoming homeless? I think it says more about the world we live in that I'm not the only one who has done this. There are many still out there now living nowhere. I came to being homeless a very roundabout way that started with very solid personal choices that I made. It's fueled by my own decisions. And, over this period of 3 years, I experimented with heroin here and there at first. And it took about 3 years for me to end up addicted, really addicted, stuck in one town, no longer moving, living out of a car, and doing heroin every day. And, everything else had fell to the wayside. And I didn't know, no one told me, when you're a kid, they tell you, don't ever do heroin. Like, if you do it once, you're going to be hooked, you won't be able to stop. So when you do it once and you don't get hooked, you're like, oh, fuck, I'm good. I'm not like these other people. Like, I can do this. And especially, like, I was able to do that here and there for a while. And the thing about traveling is, like, when you leave a city behind, you don't know where you're going, where to get that shit again in the next city, unless you've already been there. So traveling is a way to, like, escape your own addictions in a way, and to get the fuck away from, the source of those drugs, which, is not a sustainable way of life or living or escaping or solving addiction. But yeah, at that point, towards the end, I had just dug myself into a hole I didn't know how to escape. Now, homelessness was no longer a choice. And it hadn't really been for a while, and that's really how addiction works. It's insidious like that. It's one day you find yourself living out of your car in the same fucking town month after month, and you're like, oh, this is how it works. Like, this is how it got me. It was fucking slow and it took time. Over that 3-year period, like, it isn't really the mountains and rivers and oceans that I remember. It's, the people I met along the way. People like Grant, who was someone I loved with all my heart, who, like so many others, are no longer here. That story is for another episode, and I will get into all that. There are just so many different answers and stories unique to each and every person out there, and why people do this, or why they were forced into this situation. Like, some of my friends simply aged out of the foster system and became homeless, then got scooped up by some dirty kids and hit the road with them. I have one friend who started hopping trains when she was 14 after being homeless at age 11. And obviously many people are forced into that lifestyle. But interviewing them and discovering why can reveal more about the world as a whole that we live in. I am back in Springfield now. I've been here for a while, and I'm living in a recovery home. And I've come around a very roundabout way, and it has taken me a long time to get here. But I am beginning to experience a true different kind of freedom, a spiritual freedom. When it comes down to it, freedom is an idea. It's a state of mind, a spectrum. It's bullshit. It's a word. It's all these things. Obviously, when it comes to America, the idea of freedom is very fucking ironic. In the country where we have the most incarcerated people, and we dedicate all of our lives to people we've never met and making more money for them. You get the point. But that personal state of freedom, it's a moment in time. It's impossible to chase. You have to realize that you've already been there the whole time. And I'm still working on myself. And part of that is being more interested in how I can help others. There is exploration in the world of humans and humanity and people's stories. And I hope in exploring that world and trying to share people's stories, that doing so can spread some compassion and understanding and maybe reduce some stigma about not only homelessness but addiction. Yeah, why some of us are the way we are. And if you want to experience more of my own writings about my journey traveling and my journey with addiction and updates on the podcast and things of that nature, you can go to roaddogs.substack.com. So yeah, it's been a minute since my last episode, and holidays, and I just got COVID, and I'm just starting to get over that now. So, and also just like been super self-conscious about this episode and scrapped like 2 totally done versions I had of it because I created so many different files and recordings for it through the different versions that it was like super disorganized and I was getting lost in it, and I'm like, fuck, I'm never gonna be able to get this done. Yeah, it's just hard for me to do episodes about myself because I'm super self-conscious about, I've never been someone who tried to like put myself out there that much. But yeah, I'm always working on this podcast. There will always be more episodes coming. I'm trying to do them sooner. Hopefully it won't be more than a month between episodes. I do have a full-time job, this is a labor of love. It's just me working on this. But yeah, so if you want to support it, just share it with your friends is the best way to get it out there. And I really, really do appreciate you guys listening to this in the first place. Like, really, really appreciate it. Yeah, much love. Happy New Year. More episodes soon. Just like me.